came here chasing a better life too, huh? The so-called land of opportunity. Liberty City. Skyscrapers, suits, dirty money, and broken dreams. Everyone's got a story here, but most don't end well. Still, you keep pushing. Because maybe, just maybe, there's something waiting at the end of the grind. A little peace, a little rest. Well, I've got something for you. Give me your ears for a while, and I'll give you quiet. No noise, no pressure, no past, just you. And the sound of the city fading away. Liberty City never sleep, but you will. You think Vice City and Los Santos are some kind of vacation? Go ahead. Chase the sun, kiss the pavement, make some enemies. Just don't expect mercy. Not every city forgives. Liberty City, 2001. Nothing stays buried. Forever fog rolled in low over the docks at Portland Harbor, swallowing the skyline in a haze of steel and smoke. The night reeked of gasoline, betrayal, and old grudges that never really died. Liberty. City was a monument to ambition gone sour, a crooked empire carved from concrete and desperation. From the neon-dripped chaos of Staunton Island's Newport clubs to the decrepit warehouses of Trenton, every block whispered the same message. Trust no one, take everything. Out in Shoreside Vale, families locked their doors early, pretending their wealth bought immunity. But everyone knew if Liberty City wanted you, it found you. And tonight it found Tony DeSantis, fresh out of Alderney Correctional. 2 years off the grid, a name that used to echo across Fort Staunton backrooms and Callahan Bridge drop points. Now, nobody knew whether Tony was a comeback story or just another ghost clawing his way through the city's gutter. He stepped out of the cab near a boarded-up deli in St. Mark's, duffel bag in hand, leather gloves tight, eyes sharper than they'd ever been. He wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here to dig up what everyone else tried to bury. Old enemies, forgotten alliances, a suitcase that vanished before his sentence and a body never found. Liberty City had moved on without him. Now it was time to remind it who the hell he was. Fog hugged the Hudson like an unloved secret, smothering the pier, lamps of Portland Harbor, until even the rats scurried half-blind. Out on the black water, tugboats moaned as they shoved rust-eaten freighters toward cranes that had been rusting since the 80s, each mechanical groan echoing across Liberty City's myth of progress. Tony DeSantis inhaled the smell, salt, diesel, rot, and let it scrape the back of his throat. 2 years inside Alderney's concrete tomb had dulled plenty of senses, but not this one. Liberty City never changed its cologne. It just added new stains to the collar. He stepped off the curb beside a dormant produce market in Trenton rainwater, splashing around Italian leather shoes no parole officer could explain. Overhead, the elevated tracks rattled as a Porter Road subway barreled north toward Hepburn Heights, graffiti on every carriage nodding to crews that had flourished while Tony counted ceiling cracks, a low buzz in his pocket. Burner phone. Welcome home. The voice rasped like sandpaper dipped in whiskey. Carlo Mancuso, ex-soldier now reduced to running book out of a slot parlor on Espatria's waterfront. Tony said nothing. Let the silence bite. Carlo continued. Word is you're hunting the suitcase. Meet me where the city pretends nothing bad ever happens. Click. Tony pictured only one place that fit, Belleville Park, the gentrified lungs of Staunton Island, where joggers wore earbuds loud enough to drown out gunshots from neighboring Newport. Typical Carlo. Hiding dirt and daylight, he flagged a maroon Kuruma taxi, its dash cracked and the fare meter flickering like it was possessed. Staunton, Belleville Park, and step on it. The cabbie, an aging Jamaican with fleet radio pumping. Patois lullabies eyed him in the rear view. Rush hour surcharge. Tony peeled off 220s. Now it's a sprint. As the cab merged onto the Callahan Bridge, Tony studied the skyline. Skyscrapers of Bedford Point stabbing through clouds like antennas tuned to greed. The digital billboard atop the Love Media Tower looping commercials for Ammunition and Sprunk. And to the south, the faint neon kiss of red light district's brothels. Liberty City looked rich in the dark, but he knew how hollow those windows really were. Penthouse glass couldn't muffle screams from basement debtors. Halfway across the bridge, the taxi jerked to a halt behind stalled traffic. Rotating blue strobes painted the fog. LCPD cruisers boxed a hijacked Securicar. Rear doors buckled where some idiot had tried prying them with a stolen forklift. Officers dragged two bloodied stick-up kids onto wet asphalt. Meanwhile, drivers honked, outraged at the inconvenience of witnessing reality. Tony cracked the window. Damp air and siren echo poured in. A voice on the police radio squawked. Suspects claim Colombian cartel supplied intel. Proceedings will transfer to Torrington Precinct. Same old tune. Blame the Colombians, shuffle paperwork, lose the evidence. Traffic lurched forward again. Tony leaned back, eyes roaming the rusted suspension cables, flicking raindrops like mercury. He recalled the last time he'd crossed this bridge. Cuffs digging his wrists, sirens screaming vengeance for something he hadn't even done. At least not personally. The suitcase had vanished. A body had washed up near Francis International's runway rocks, and the DA needed a patsy. Shoreside. Vale's cliffs emerged to the west. $1-million houses perched like vultures above Pike Creek's penitentiary glow. Money up there rarely dirtied its own hands. It paid guys like Tony, then testified against them when convenient. The cab finally rolled into Staunton, where polished sidewalk cafes squatted next to bullet-scarred phone booths. Tourist liberty, and native liberty inseparable as Siamese corpses. Belleville Park glistened under Art Deco street lamps, benches still damp from a forgotten drizzle. Joggers in neon lycra circled a fountain erected to honor liberty's resilience, whatever that meant this decade. Tony tossed cash onto the front seat. Keep the change, drive careful. The cabbie scoffed. Careful ain't how the city rolls, boss. Tires screeched off toward Newport's bridge. Carlo waited near the statue of some obsolete mayor. Trenchcoat, fedora, cheap cigarette trembling in wind. His once broad shoulders now slumped like they carried unpaid balances. You look smaller, Tony said by way of greeting. Prison diets work wonders. Carlo managed a grin. Smoke curled from his nostrils. Word travels fast. You asking about that case is like ringing church bells. Everybody hears, nobody prays. Tony stared at the fountain's shimmering surface. I need names, not metaphors. Start with Luigi Gaudarelli. Runs Sex Club 7 down on red light. Says he saw Frankie Falsetta the night the suitcase disappeared. Tony's jaw tightened. Frankie Filet Falsetta. Butcher shop front in St. Mark's. Habit of dismembering people, as neatly as veal cutlets. Rumor claimed Frankie fenced the suitcase for a mystery buyer, then vanished hours before Tony's arrest. You sure Luigi's breathing? Only because he rents cops by the hour. Word is he's throwing a VIP party tonight. Show up. Flash. Some nostalgia. Maybe he sings. Tony considered. Nightclubs meant crowds, security, and cameras. Risky, but information rarely walked quiet streets. Carlo flicked ash. There's more. Leone family's restless since Salvatore got iced. Joey Leone's jockeying for territory in Fort Staunton, bumping heads with Yakuza. Your name pops, they'll sniff opportunity. Let them sniff. Tony muttered. I'm done being anyone's fall guy. A distant church bell struck 7. Carlo dropped the cigarette, grinding ember to mush. Liberty's tides don't wait. You want allies. You'll need cash. The suitcase starts the engine. After that, up to you whether you drive or crash. Rain resumed, gentle but steady, rippling the fountain. Carlo melted into pedestrian flow, leaving Tony alone among tulip beds and marble plaques. He pulled up his collar, mind-mapping routes. Subway to Newport, walkway to Red Light, slip into Luigi's Club before midnight. But first gear. You don't walk into a mob den carrying just regrets. Tony cut through Belleville's North Path, past a mime performing for nobody, to a parked coach bus repurposed as a mobile thrift stall. Inside, a former Bulgarian arms runner named Mila hawked everything from knockoff handbags to Serbian pistol parts. Need something concealable, Tony said. She eyed him, read the scars peeking above his gloves. From a shoebox under vintage vinyls, she produced a compact 9mm Patrina serial. Filed off. 200 no ammo. Tony counted crisp bills, it hurt his thin roll, and snagged a half-empty magazine from a fishbowl marked souvenirs. Now it's loaded. Weapon braced in waistband, he headed for the Staunton South subway entrance. Graffiti along the stairwell, spelled "Stay Dead" in dripping crimson, a love letter from the Diablos to anyone crossing Hepburn Heights uninvited. Tony smirked. Neighborhoods wrote poetry now. The platform smelled of mold and lost chances. A busker strummed an out-of-tune guitar, singing about broken cabs and busted dreams. The train screeched in, doors sliding with the enthusiasm of guillotines. As Tony boarded, he caught his reflection in the window. Eyes like cracked marbles, hair slick from rain, posture taut as a sprung bear trap. Somewhere between Trenton's warehouses and Belleville's manicured lawns, he'd felt the city's old voltage surge back into him. Liberty didn't forgive, it just reset the chessboard. Pieces like Tony got another move, if they drew blood before someone toppled them again. 20 minutes later, he surfaced on the pedestrian walkway above Newport's marinas, where yachts bobbed beside barges smuggling untaxed cigarettes. Red Light District's neon loomed 3 blocks east, a liquid glow pulsing to house beats even this early. The air here was thick with perfume, exhaust, and desperation straining against fishnet tights. He ducked into an alley behind a shuttered electronics store, checking the gun, nerves thrumming. Across the street, Sex Club 7's entrance glowed pink, flanked by velvet ropes and a pair of bouncers built like toll booths. A line of party kids, Wall Street interns chasing grime for credibility, snaked around the corner, oblivious to how often lines blurred between fantasy and funeral. Tony waited, scanning faces. No Frankie, no Luigi yet. He'd need an angle for entry. Fate obliged when a stretch sentinel pulled up, music shaking its body panels. Out stepped Candy Sucks, skin-tight silver dress, paparazzi bait. Rumor said she owed Luigi 80 grand in promotion fees. If she was on tonight's bill, Tony could slip inside amid the commotion. Candy tottered toward the door, trailing perfume and a coked-out entourage. Cameras flashed, the bouncers parted. Tony slid in behind, flashed a confident nod nobody had authorized, and the velvet rope dropped as if it feared his momentum. Inside, Sex Club 7 was an ultraviolet jungle. Steel cages hung from the ceiling. Dancers writhed in synthetic rain. Bass lines hammered ribs. Mirrors on every wall fractured the crowd into kaleidoscopes of lust and envy. Tony's prison-trained eyes cut through strobe chaos, locating vantage points. Bar to the left, VIP lounge up a chrome staircase, Security booth opposite restrooms. AEOI Diom. The bar, he ordered club soda. Clear heads see clear exits. Bartender's wrist tattoo flagged allegiance to the Leone family. Tony slid a 50 across. Luigi expecting me? The bartender glanced at the bill, then at Tony's weathered face, connecting dots older than his own adulthood. He thumbed a mic by his collar. Seconds later, a hostess in leopard print beckoned Tony toward the staircase. VIP smelled like spilled champagne and unresolved trauma. Leather booths circled a glass table piled with cigars and invoices. And there, Luigi Gottarelli, suit too shiny. For comfort, gold chain flashing every syllable of his ego. Tony freaking DeSantis. Luigi stood arms wide. Thought you'd be sunning on some witness protection beach? I burn easy, Tony replied, sliding into the booth. His eyes swept the guards. Two gorillas packing Mac 10s under faux designer jackets. Need to talk about Frankie. Luigi laughed, a wet cough. Everyone wants to talk about ghosts. Frankie's fish food. Dead fish don't spend money. Someone's got the suitcase, and someone kept Frankie quiet. I'm guessing that someone's still paying your club's electric bill. Luigi's grin faltered. He tapped ash onto a napkin printed with the club's logo. You turn over that rock, you'll find snakes bigger than me. Then I'll buy bigger boots. A hush fell as Candy Sucks stumbled through curtains, escorted by a handler shouting about overdue appearance fees. Luigi snapped his fingers, signaling for privacy. The gorillas drew the curtains, muffling the club's roar. Luigi leaned in. Rumor says Frankie fenced the case to a buyer sitting pretty in Bedford Point penthouse. Politician type thinks campaign donations erase bullet holes. Names Commissioner Landon Crowell. Tony knew Crowell, public face of anti-crime crusades. Privately, the reason trunk murders went uninvestigated. Why sell to him? Luigi shrugged. Insurance. Politicians stash evidence like choir boys stash dirty magazines. Tony stood. Address. Luigi scribbled on a cocktail napkin, slid it over. You didn't get it from me. Tony pocketed the note. If I succeed, suitcase disappears. If I fail, Crowell burns you to save himself. Either way, thanks for the drink. He walked out, ignoring Candy's slurred plea for publicity. The club's base faded behind him, replaced by distant wail of ambulances racing down Columbus Avenue. Rain had stopped. Steam rose from sewer grates like ghosts freed from asphalt graves. Back in the alley, Tony exhaled slow, letting the city's electricity nestle under his skin. Crowell's penthouse meant high security, political fallout, maybe federal heat. Perfect. He clicked open his flip phone, dialed Carlo. Got a lead. Need blueprints for Horizon Tower, Bedford Point, and a clean sniper nest. Damn it, Tone, starting a war. I'm just digging up what everyone buried, Tony answered, eyes on the skyline's tallest spire. If they didn't want the stink, they shouldn't have hidden the body. Above him, lightning crackled over the skyscrapers, briefly rendering Liberty City in stark white. Towers, bridges, and the invisible scars connecting every borough. The storm wasn't ending. It was only changing shape. Tony holstered the Patrina, turned his collar to the wind, and stepped into the night, ready to remind Liberty City that some graves never stay closed. The dawn chill bit into Tony's collar as he parked the rumbling Kuruma behind a crumbling textile mill in South Shore. In his lap lay Crowell's address, Horizon Tower, the glittering spire piercing the Bedford Point skyline like a monument to untouchable wealth. 2 blocks north, The Love Media billboards flickered in early light, hawking liberty for all with ironic zeal. Below them, countless souls still struggled for a scrap of dignity. But up here, Crowell's penthouse floated above consequence. Tony killed the engine and slipped on nitrile gloves. His gear was laid out in the passenger seat. A compact breaching shotgun, collapsible baton, lockpick set, and a slim-lined breather mask. Everything Carlo had whispered about over that crackling burner line. Bytes' hacked blueprints scrolled, in his mind, a service shaft off the 42nd floor, a maintenance ladder behind a false panel, and a corridor of laser-tripped motion sensors guarding the penthouse's glass-walled foyer. Every detail had to be perfect. One slip, one tremor in the shaft, and he'd be a corpse draped over Commissioner Crowell's marble floors. He melted into the empty sidewalk, boots splashing through a slick of last night's rain. Horizon Tower's polished facade loomed. Ahead, its entrance ringed by board security cameras. Two guards lounged under neon lamps, one chain-smoking, the other scrolling through bets on his cracked phone. Tony approached at a jog, then slowed to a pedestrian stride, jostling a Starbucks in his hand. He feigned a dropped glove, bending casually to retrieve it, all while gauging their patrol pattern. The younger guard never looked up. Inside, the lobby tripped a nervous hum of elevators. Floor indicators glowed like low-grade spotlights. Tony tapped the service elevator call button hidden behind a bronze panel and slipped in before a suited executive could swipe his keycard. The doors slid shut in his face. He pressed the S button. No chime, no fanfare, just the low squeal of cables against metal. The car jerked upward, carrying him past levels of duplex apartments, fitness centers, even a glass-floored aquarium on the 30th that housed exotic fish smuggled from shores no one in Liberty City could pronounce. Tony's reflection flickered against the mirrored walls. Eyes sharp, breath steady, mind already on the penthouse's vulnerabilities. At floor 42, he hit the hidden release latch Byte had unlocked. The elevator doors peeled open onto a dimly lit service corridor. Industrial pipes snaked overhead, occasional valves dripping condensation onto safety grates. Tony dropped his Starbucks into a wall bin, pulled the breather mask over his face, and moved with feline grace toward the maintenance hatch. A pressure plate lay just inside. Byte's notes had warned him. Tony balanced on his toes, twisting the panel free and sliding through the narrow gap. For a moment he hung suspended, heart pounding as the steel door thudded closed above him. Then he dropped into a shaft of stale air and began the climb, forearms screaming from the weight of his pack. Minutes passed like lifetimes. The city's distant roar faded until all Tony could hear was his own pulse and the thrum of the building's generators. Halfway up, he paused on a landing to wipe sweat from his brow, the faint glow of an emergency exit sign illuminating a scribbled scrawl. Liberty is won in darkness. A smirk cut across his face, blood-slick graffiti from some late-night anarchist. He climbed again. At the top of the shaft, a false panel swung open into a narrow alcove. Tony slipped out, greeted by the scent of polished teak and high-end air freshener. His eyes adjusted to soft indirect lighting outlining a long hallway. Two infrared sensors blinked at shoulder height. Byte had upgraded their ghost mode with a hacked override. Tony tapped his comm link twice. Byte's voice crackled softly in his ear. Sensors offline for 30 seconds. Move. He advanced past the first beam, then the next, imagining invisible lines of red crisscrossing before him. The door to Crowell's penthouse lay just beyond. It was a brushed steel slab with a thick keycard scanner and biometric lock. Tony reached inside his jacket, retrieving a swiped card Carlo had borrowed from a customs official, and a fingerprint mold Byte had 3D printed from a gathering of Crowell's discarded coffee cups. The scanner beeped green, with a gentle hiss. The door slid open into a foyer filled with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Bedford Point's docks. A live bonsai tree perched on a marble plinth, its twisted trunk casting long shadows. A waiter's trolley sat abandoned in the corner, silver trays still gleaming with canapes. Tony heard the muffled voice of Crowell deeper inside, lecturing an unseen guest. He eased the door closed, then pushed forward, baton braced for impact. The hallway curved left into a large living area dominated by a glass wall. Through a crystal decanter array and leather seating, he spotted Crowell, tailored suit impeccable, eyes narrowed at a wall-mounted flat screen showing municipal budget breakdowns. Beside him stood an assistant commissioner he'd never heard of, a thin man with bowed shoulders and twitchy fingers. Momentum carried Tony into a fluid lunge. The baton cracked against the assistant's jaw, sending him sprawling. Crowell spun, eyes wide, but Tony was already hauling his shotgun from under a jacket seam. He didn't fire, he didn't need to. The click of action was enough to freeze Crowell in place. "Where is it?" Tony's voice was a low blade. Crowell swallowed. How? Cut the act." Tony inched forward, boots crunching on, imported Irish wool carpet. "That suitcase or you'll be the next body in it." Crowell's gaze flicked to the large safe built into the wall beside a display of mayoral awards. He raised a trembling hand and hit a sequence on a hidden keypad. The safe door swung wide, revealing black leather briefcases stacked like grave markers. Tony strode over and yanked the top case free, feeling the heft of truth in its lock. He pressed the shotgun stock into Crowell's hip. "Open it." With shaking fingers, Crowell unlatched the clasps. Inside lay a single manila envelope, sealed with a gubernatorial wax stamp. No suitcase, but the envelope bulged with photographs, audio drives, and an original blood-spattered keycard. Evidence collected, curated, and hidden at the highest level. Tony flipped through the photos. Staged hits, secret bribes, recordings of judges taking cash. He closed the envelope and replaced it in the case. "Your move." Crowell's face crumpled. "Take it, just leave me breathing." Tony nodded once, hefted the briefcase, and backed toward the door. He paused at the threshold. Liberty City doesn't bury its sins, they rot in plain sight. Make sure you're part of the cure, not the infection. He slipped out, heart hammering, as accompaniment to the rising sun glinting off the Hudson. Down the corridor, halfway through the service hatch, he paused long enough to listen. The faint click of an alarm sensor rearming. Byte's override was nearly expired. Tony plunged back through the maintenance shaft, boots hitting the lobby, marble just as the elevator bell chimed. Security guards swiveled, eyes wide, but Tony melted into a departing crowd. Tourists gawking at early morning sun on the water, business people rushing late to the financial district of Algonquin. A block away, he ducked into a greasy spoon in Trenton and slid into a booth. He cracked open the briefcase, fished out the envelope, and pressed play on the smallest audio drive. Crowell's own voice spilled discussions of pay-to-play rackets and murder contracts, words that could decapitate every pillar of Liberty City's crooked foundation. Outside, the city roared back to life. Subways rattling, car horns blaring, news tickers flashing, commissioner under fire. The revolution was no longer a series of whispered plans. It was live, broadcast on every screen from Chinatown to Staunton Island. Tony leaned back, tracing the condensation on his coffee mug. He'd won this round, but Liberty City's heart still smoked with vengeance and greed. Ahead lay 10 more chapters of blood and betrayal, alliances to forge, enemies to outwit, and the final reckoning waiting like a vulture circling over Fort Staunton. He tapped his phone. "All clear. Let's wake the city." The reply blinked, almost instantly. "I'm already live." And somewhere in the skyscrapers above, Liberty City trembled at the sound of a name rising from the ashes. Tony DeSantis. Tony DeSantis returned to the South Shore safe house just as dawn cracked the sky in sickly yellow streaks. The abandoned textile mill loomed behind him, an industrial carcass repurposed into a rebel HQ by Carlo's ingenuity and Byte's hacked wiring. In the cavernous main room, walls plastered with Everon posters and dog-eared maps, Rico and Lucho hunched over the console where the stolen evidence played on loop. Commissioned murders, under-the-table payoffs, audio confessions harvested straight from Crowell's own lips. Every frame hammered home the depth of corruption that had soaked into Liberty City's highest offices. Crowell's one fall away from total collapse, Byte murmured, eyes bloodshot. He'd rigged the feed to every local news station. By this evening, every precinct will have flash alerts. But the question is, who's going to try to snatch back control? Rico cracked his knuckles. The Leone family's licking their chops. Joey's already making moves in Fort Staunton. Word is he thinks this power vacuum is a chance to reclaim turf that Salvatore lost. He tapped a borough map, tracing a route from the safe house down the I-25 viaduct across the Callahan Bridge to Trenton. If Joey Leone goes all out, we're going to have gunfire echoing from Portland Harbor to the borders of Shoreside Vale. Lucho lit a cigarette under the harsh glare of a single bulb. We need allies. The Russians in Newport still owe us for that missing weapons shipment. And the Haitian crew in St. Mark's, they're itching to settle the score with the Colombians, after that botched deal last month. He flicked ash onto Byte's blueprints. We form a coalition. Information's our currency, muscle is theirs. Tony paced between steel-framed windows. Beyond the cracked panes, red-tailed hawks circled over the Schottler building, a former factory now reborn as luxury lofts for the rich who never saw the dock's grime. First, he said, we secure this evidence. We need a secure location outside the safe house, something off the grid. He turned to Rico. You know those abandoned tunnels under Francis International Airport? We hide it there. Rico nodded. The labyrinthine maintenance shafts of the airport were perfect for a ghost cache. Byte cracked his knuckles, already pulling up schematics. I'll set up an encrypted beacon. Anyone we trust can ping for coordinates, but the LCPD and their cronies will never find it. Lucho smirked. While you two do that, I'll swing by the docks district. The Haitians owe me a favor after I tipped them to a Colombian arms shipment that went south. They're looking for leverage. We'll offer them a slice of the Crowell. Takedown if they bring 40 guys ready for war. Tony exhaled slow, letting the plan crystallize. We also need to neutralize Joey Leone before he splinters the family. He's meeting his consigliere tonight at the Neptune Bar in Newport, by the old shipyard crane. We crash it, remind him who's running this. At midday, Tony slipped out in a weathered black Kuruma, Carlo riding shotgun. They tore across the Callahan Bridge into Newport's industrial maze, where rusted cargo containers made perfect cover. Beneath the skeletal framework of a ship repair dock, Tony accessed a grated hatch leading into the Francis International Maintenance tunnels. Armed guards at the entrance blinked at his uniform, a stolen LCPD jumpsuit Byte had fabricated. Within minutes, he'd concealed the black briefcase under the plenum of an abandoned sub-air duct, GPS tagged and triple locked. Back above ground, the neon clinics of Newport cast a jaundiced glow over Bertoni's wharf. Carlo popped the trunk and handed Tony a duffel bag filled with false IDs, burner phones, and enough cash to bribe every petty cop from Schottler to Belleville. "We'll bleed Crowell dry before he sees it coming," he said. That night, the Neptune bar was a war zone of cigar smoke and polished brass. Joey Leone lounged in a leather booth, flanked by two hulking enforcers. The Yakuza consigliere, Masaru. The surgeon Ito sat opposite him, sampling sake and tapping a finger on the table. Tony and Lucho entered through a side door, riffing the front door bouncers with a craving for justice routine. Lucho flashed a tip-off that the Colombians planned a hit inside, enough to draw attention away from the real problem. Inside, the bar's rear door blew in on a violent gust of wind. Tommy drifted forward, Colt 45 in hand. "Joey," he called over the din. "Long time." Leone's grin snapped. "You're early, Tony. I got—" Before he finished, a burst of flashbang smoke filled the room. In the chaos, Rico and the Haitian reinforcements fanned out, corralling the Yakuza and escorting the surgeon into a back office. Tommy marched straight up to Joey, eyes cold. "You're finished." By the time the smoke cleared, Joey's empire had collapsed in under 90 seconds. LCPD sirens wailed outside, triggered by Byte's remote hack of the Neptune's fire alarms, designed to flush out any stragglers. As Joey was cuffed, screaming about betrayal, Tony retrieved the surgeon's phone. Hidden in its data was contact info for the Russian boss, Viktor Petrov, in Newport's North Pier. The following evening, a makeshift convoy assembled at the old textile mill. Tony, Carlo, Byte, Lucho, plus representatives from the Haitian and Russian crews. They rolled out toward Newport's concrete piers, headlights slicing through the lingering fog. At Pier 39, Viktor Petrov greeted them beneath the graffiti-scarred crane, flanked by burly Slavic mercenaries wearing Soviet tattoos faded by time. A standoff ensued. Tony laid Crowell's briefcase on a battered shipping crate and played a snippet of Crowell's confession. The Russians traded glances, then nodded. "We're in." With every shift of alliances, Liberty City's criminal tapestry rewove itself into a fragile new pattern, one held together by the mutual fear of exposure. But Tony knew this precarious unity had an expiration date. The final strike would be at Crowell's mayoral campaign gala, an all-white party in the marble halls of Love Media Tower on the broker side of town. In the days that followed, Liberty City convulsed with revelations. The public uproar over Crowell's indiscretions toppled 2 city council members, triggered riots in Little Italy, and sparked an LCPD corruption probe that echoed all the way to Portland's mayoral office. Tony watched the chaos on Byte's hacked news feeds, a rueful smile on his lips. The city was bleeding out its rot. But as neon signs buzzed across Staunton Island and the Rust Belt gang squared off under the Callahan Bridge, Tony understood this was only the second act in a grand, brutal play. Tomorrow, he would crash the gala at Love Media Tower, an event guarded by private militias and armed drones. And after that, only one chapter would remain before Liberty City truly remembered his name. Tony slid into the backseat of a black Vigilante parked in a shadowed alcove across from Love Media Tower. The gala's all-white dress code glowed through tinted windows, suits brighter than ivory sheets, gowns whispering with silk and secrets. Above them, digital billboards blasted campaign slogans for Crowell's sudden reform initiative. A new era of trust. Anyone with an ear to the ground knew those were lies wrapped in pearls. Bite tapped Tony's shoulder, eyes flicking, to the door. We're live on 3 feeds. Once we go, they'll see everything. The hacker's gaunt face glowed in the phone's screen light. Chipped paint, laughter lines erased by years of neon and night. Lucho and Rico flanked the vigilantes' doors, weapons concealed beneath tailored jackets. Outside, the gala's red carpet led into a glass atrium where champagne towers and art installations by celebrity sculptors mocked the city's broken bones. Doormen in crisp vests scanned invitations with illuminated readers. A simple blackout would turn their tech astoundingly useless. Tony exhaled slowly, checking his reflection in the tinted glass. Bow tie slightly askew, gloves immaculate. He flicked the briefcase latch closed and nodded. Bite raised a gloved hand. Now. Loud pops echoed through the lobby as automatons, Bite's remote drones, set off flashbangs in the parking garage, sending security into disarray. The power flickered. Cameras went dark and doors clicked unlocked. It was their moment. Lucho and Rico burst through the main entrance, guns raised. Tony followed, briefcase in one hand, pistol in the other. Panic rippled through the gala as guests screamed. Champagne glasses shattered and waiters dropped trays. Panic and camera flashes mingled, capturing a scene more explosive than any red carpet premiere. Tony strode into the atrium, voice met by startled gasps. "Commissioner Crowell!" His pistol traced a line from the glass frog fountain to the massive marble dais where Crowell stood beneath a neon Liberty statue. Flanked by aides in ivory suits, Crowell's sculpted hair and confident smile turned ashen. He raised trembling hands. "Mr. DeSantis, well, what is the meaning of—" Tony set the briefcase on the dais. "You hid the truth," he said, opening the case. Stacks of envelopes, drives, and files gleamed under emergency lighting. Now everyone sees. With a button, Press Bite streamed the files to every screen in the atrium and onto hacked live news channels. Gowns became panic dresses. Champagne became uncontrollable thirst for justice. Security guards froze as exposés of murder-for-hire contracts and bribery schemes filled the airwaves. Crowell's aides scrambled to shield their boss, but Lucho intercepted their phones, forcing them to play incriminating audio in a hall bursting with ivory tuxedos and frantic jewelers. The bubble of extravagance burst, replaced by the raw ache of betrayal. Sirens wailed outside as the LCPD, too slow to react, found their digital networks paralyzed. Bite's silent audience tapped into public broadcast frequencies, ensuring no guest, no hidden camera, no corner would escape the truth. Liberty City's elite melted away like wax figurines under heat lamps. Crowell, white-knuckled, stumbled backward. "You can't. This is political suicide." Tony managed a cold grin. "Not anymore." He stepped back, allowing the revelry of outrage to consume the room. As guests stampeded for exits, he turned and walked down the red carpet trail of chaos. Lucho and Rico cleared the perimeter, escorting him back to the vigilante. Inside, Bite exhaled. Stream still live in the streets, they're chanting your name. Carlo leaned in. "You want my advice? Skip town, let the dust settle." Tony looked back at the crumbling facade of Love Media Tower. Neon lights flickered out, replaced by holograms screaming, "Justice for Liberty." Protesters gathered outside. City drones lowered cameras for live coverage. He latched the briefcase. Justice doesn't wait. As the vigilante peeled away into the early morning haze, Tony knew one final reckoning remained. One that would seal Liberty City's fate and etch his name into its blood-soaked history. Tony peeled away from Love Media Tower as the first tendrils of dawn split the fog over the harbor. Bite sat in the passenger seat, fingers dancing across a compact laptop, streaming every angle of the gala meltdown to half the city's devices. Lucho and Rico rode in the back, eyes glued to the red carpet carnage still flickering on phone screens. Behind them, neon signs sputtered out one by one, replaced on every monitor by the words "Liberty for Real" emblazoned across the broadcast. They threaded through the waking streets of Algonquin, tires hissing past the peeling murals of Portland Harbor, and under the skeletal arches of the Callahan Bridge. Shops on Harwood Boulevard shuttered their gates against the morning chill. Early commuters on the Porter Road subway saw a black vigilante fly by in a blur. When they crossed into Bohan, the city's scars were laid bare. Boarded-up storefronts, concrete pylons tagged with warnings from every gang in town, and the occasional dispassionate tourist clutching a map of safe zones. This was no tourist's Liberty City. It was their battlefield. At the old textile mill safe house in South Shore, they found only silence. Floorboards creaked, the half-lit walls still bore Bite's hastily scrawled maps, but all the power strips had been yanked out. An unceremonious note fluttered on the console. "Next time you vanish, look under the Francis International tunnels." No signature, no warning bells, just proof someone had been in, had studied their movements, had dared to come behind them. Tony's fist split the stale air. "They've got eyes on us." Bite swore softly, juggling firewalls to trace the intruder's hack. "Whatever guard we left has already called in reinforcements." Lucho flicked a cigarette butt into an empty malt crate. "Time for Plan B." Carlo appeared from the shadows, nodding once. "I've got a hollow beneath the Algonquins. Basement parking, old maintenance tunnels under Francis International. Quiet. No one thinks to look there." They loaded the briefcases into a nondescript van and piled into the vigilante. Under the skeletal overpass of Delancey Road, Bite remotely activated a decoy feed. Fake GPS pings leading every scanner to an abandoned warehouse on Newport's waterfront, where the Leone family's men lay in wait. As the decoy convoy roared past, Tony guided the real convoy onto the faded service road that wound under the airport's vaulted terminals. They hit the gravel path, headlights cutting thin arcs through the morning mist. Inside the Francis tunnels, the air was dank. Rust flaked from overhead rails. Stale breeze whispered across empty platforms. They slipped through a maintenance hatch, boots echoing on tracks that hadn't heard a train in years. Bite keyed in his override codes on a battered terminal. Lights sputtered on in a hidden chamber, revealing a concrete alcove reinforced with steel girders. This became their new vault, a place so deep and so seldom traveled that even the LCPD had forgotten it existed. They stashed the commissioner's briefcase behind a false wall, GPS tagged and encrypted so only Tony's crew could unlock it when the time was right. But the suitcase, Tony's original prize, still eluded them. Carlo pointed to a lighter smudge on Bite's map, an unmarked warehouse in St. Mark's just south of the red light district's neon maze. Rumor had it that Joey Leone's men had requisitioned it for long-term storage. Now that Joey's power base was fractured, the crate holding the suitcase would be underprotected. Under cover of midday sun, Tony and Lucho navigated back toward the city's corrosive heart. They emerged near Columbus Avenue's shuttered electronics store, the same alley where Tony had first slipped into Sex Club 7. Past scent traps of perfume and exhaust, they approached the warehouse, half camouflaged by shipping containers and repainted just enough to fool casual eyes. Lucho jammed the lock while Tony kept watch. The lock clicked free and they slipped inside. Rows of steel shelving held crates stamped with Leone family seals. Tony knelt by the nearest stack, pried open the lid of a battered wooden box. Inside lay a weathered, reinforced suitcase, its leather scuffed, its lock smeared with dried salt water. He lifted it like an ancient reliquary, feeling its weight and promise. Lucho stood guard as Tony snapped the clasps open. Inside lay vintage bills folded into neat stacks, a faded photograph of Frankie Falsetta with a cryptic note on the back, and the faded remnants of a manila folder Tony recognized, the one that proved his innocence 2 years ago. He sank to one knee, eyes damp with something close to triumph. Everywhere he'd turned, Liberty City had tried to bury the past. Now he held it in his hands. Lucho touched his shoulder. "We got it." Tony nodded, sliding the contents into his jacket and closing the suitcase. "We end this today." They retraced their steps through the labyrinth of the red light district, racing past the gutted storefronts of Chinatown and under the flickering neon gate of Bennett Avenue. By dusk they regrouped at the Francis Tunnel's hideaway. Bite rejoined them, grinning behind the laptop's glow. "Once we drop this out on every frequency, you can watch the pillars crumble." Tony stood in the center of that dank chamber, suitcase in hand, listening to the distant rumble of a city waiting for its reckoning. "Then we build something better," he said. He hit the remote transmitter. Instantly, the suitcase's contents, the photograph, the folder, the old bills, were live on every news channel, every public monitor, every bleeding LCPD cruiser. Dashcam above, Liberty City exhaled in shock and rage. Below, Tony closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight shift. The final reckoning was at hand, and no secret would stay buried again. A low rumble shook the Francis tunnels as Tony, Carlo, Rico, and Lucho assembled their small army beneath the city. The hidden chamber groaned under the weight of crates, rifles, breaching charges, med packs, supplied by the Haitian crew and Viktor Petrov's Russians. Bite planted the last node of his encrypted mesh network, fingers flying across a battered laptop. "Once we storm Fort Staunton," he said, "every street cam and drone in the city will feed live to our stream. No backup, no mercy." They moved out in 5 unmarked vans, lights off, racing under the Callahan Bridge. Rain sliced through the night air, turning the road into black glass. The convoy snaked north into Shoreside Vale, where the mansions perched like vultures over Pike Creek Penitentiary. Tony peered out the window at the lockboxes behind iron gates. This was where Crowell's final refuge hid in plain sight, shielded by wealth and crooked influence. Behind those gates lay the old St. Michael's Cathedral, a Gothic ruin refurbished into a fortified fortress. Its stained glass windows were boarded. Its steeple bristled with motion sensors and thermal arrays. They unloaded at a service entrance, beneath the eastern apse, where Bite's hacked override had silenced alarms for precisely 13 seconds. Rico detached explosive charges from his belt, planting them on reinforced steel doors. Lucho activated his earpiece. First detonation in 3, 2, 1. A thunderclap deeper than any storm ripped through the cathedral's underbelly, shattering lock sets and flinging steel hinges like spent cartridge cases. The breach alarms blared, but Bite had looped the city feed to show only static. For a precious 30 seconds, the cathedral's skeleton lay undefended. Inside, military-grade generators roared to life, flooding the nave with stark white floodlights. Tony kicked open the debris-strewn door, shotgun raised. Shadows unfurled across broken pews and shattered pewter chalices. A dozen mercenaries in black fatigues turned, rifles snapping up. Rico and the Russians surged left and right, raking the choke point with controlled suppression fire. Lucho dashed forward, downed a guard with a clean rifle shot, and grabbed his Fortio. "South wing clear," he reported. Tony advanced through the cathedral's aisles, boots echoing on cracked marble. Above him, Gothic arches soared into darkness. He spotted Crowell's enforcer detail fanning out around a makeshift command post. LED screens glowed on folding tables, mapping escape routes out to the docks. Carlo appeared at his side, tossing a breaching charge at a console. "I'll mute their comms," Carlo growled, setting the timer. Sparks arced across circuitry as the charge detonated, frying radios and plunging the command post into silence. A single figure moved at the rear of the war room. Commissioner Landon Crowell, flanked by 2 bodyguards. His tuxedo was immaculate, but sweat beaded at his temples. Tony dropped to one knee behind a shattered pew, aimed, and fired. One round snapped through Crowell's left guard's rifle barrel, shattering its chamber. The second guard raised, his weapon. Tony's shotgun blast knocked him off his feet like a puppet with cut strings. Crowell stumbled back, hands raised. "Don't make me shoot you," Tony said, voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Open the cassette." Crowell's jaw trembled. He backed away, pulling an encrypted hard drive from his inside pocket and dropping it at Tony's feet. "Take it. Just don't—" A sudden flash of movement to Tony's left, a sniper round embedded in the stone pillar behind him. A rooftop gunner had Crowell's back, the commissioner's final gambit to buy time. Rico roared and sprinted across the altar, slamming the butt of his rifle into the gunner's face, sending him reeling off the balcony above. He crashed through an Oculus window, shards of stained glass fluttering like black feathers. Tony seized Crowell by the collar and hauled him forward. "This ends now." Crowell's eyes flickered with panic, but a grim acceptance settled over his features. "You'll regret—" Tony slammed his hand over Crowell's mouth. "Save it for the judge." He clipped Army-issue zip ties around Crowell's wrists and patted his pockets for any other drives. Bite and Carlo swept in from the side, securing the final 2 guards in ragged chains of restraints. Outside, the cathedral exploded into light as Bite activated his override. Security cameras, once Crowell's eyes in the dark, flipped to external broadcast, relaying the entire assault in real time to every street corner monitor. Every live feed from Vespucci to Belleville, the Haitian and Russian crews fanned out through side corridors, bulldozing any reinforcements rushing from Towerside Vale. Bullets ricocheted off sandstone walls, and shouts of men yelling in Haitian Creole and Russian curses reverberated down the aisles. In less than 7 minutes, the cathedral's fortified heart was breached, its darkest refuge torn open. Tony walked Crowell past overturned altars and shattered hymnals, toward an armored panel that led to a freight tunnel under Francis International Airport. As they descended, Crowell's tie trailed dust. His world, once high-soaring, crumbled underfoot. Bite closed the last door behind them, sealing alarms from the rooftop squads. "We've got 10 minutes before every force in the city tries to intersect this tunnel." He keyed a handheld device, triggering a cascade of encrypted pings. The public streams went viral instantly. Crowell's capture, the cathedral raid, The final hard drive with 30 years of pay-to-play evidence. Liberty City ignited. Sirens swelled. News helicopters circled. And in Chinatown, angry crowds poured into the streets, chanting Tony's name. They emerged into pre-dawn light at a hidden airstrip by the Hudson docks, Carlo's arranged Cessna 208 engines already warming. Crowell was hustled into the cargo hold, guarded by 2 Haitian heavies. Tony placed the black drive into a Pelican case and handed it to Bite. Send every bit to every outlet, then wipe it clean. Bite nodded, slipping the case into Tony's pack. Rico climbed aboard, slamming the door. The plane lifted, rotors churning mist over the water. From the cockpit, Carlo called back, "Next stop, you're on the front page." As the airstrip shrank beneath them, Tony stared out at the towers of Bedford Point and the haze of Fort Staunton behind them. Once a fortress of corruption, now a tomb of exposed lies. In the cabin's hush, Crowell curled in a seat, watching the shoreline recede. He caught Tony's gaze. "You know this city can swallow you whole." Tony gave a half smile. "Only if you let it." Outside, Liberty City flared with protest and celebration alike. Neon signs struck down, replaced by beams of digital truth shooting across the skyline. The Cessna banked north toward remote airspace, carrying its living freight, evidence and capture both, toward federal shores and the promise of real justice. Below, a city roused from decades of darkness, its heartbeat pounding in every alley, every rooftop, every broadcast. And high above, the fugitive turned liberator finally allowed. Himself one slow breath, knowing the final reckoning was within reach, and that Liberty City would never forget the name Tony DeSantis. Dawn broke in cold streaks across the private airstrip by the Hudson docks as the Cessna's propeller slowed to a stop. Tony swung the cabin door open and breathed in the damp river air. Tang of salt and old oil, undercut by the distant rumble of early morning traffic on the Callahan Bridge. Beside him, Bite shut his laptop and snapped the Pelican case closed with a decisive click. Rico and Lucho gathered around Commissioner Crowell's handcuffed form, keeping him illuminated in the pale light until the unmarked black SUVs rolled up. A tall man in a gray suit, Agent Sean Mulligan from the FBI, stepped forward, badge clipped, to his breast pocket. His gaze flicked from the Pelican case to Tony's face, measuring the man who had just upended Liberty City's power structure. "Thank you," Mulligan said quietly as federal agents slipped Crowell out of Rico's grip and into their squad car. "We'll take it from here." Tony nodded, sensing the weight of that word. Here. That small syllable marked the end of one war and the beginning of another. One fought in courtrooms and newsrooms instead of shadowed warehouses. But before they could slip away, a black Suburban skidded in behind the FBI convoy, sirens silent but lights flashing. A news crew piled out, cameras swiveling toward the hulking form of Tony DeSantis, who just turned the city's most untouchable official into a prisoner. One of the reporters, a young woman with a coil of dark hair and a notepad already full of scribbles, pushed her microphone toward Tony. "Mr. DeSantis, what's next? Are you going to face justice?" Her voice wavered between accusation and awe. Tony exhaled slowly, gloved hand brushing spent rain from his jacket. He looked out at the river, its surface like melted lead reflecting the battered skyline. "I already faced the system," he said, voice low but steady. "They sent me to Alderney for a murder I didn't commit. I'll make sure they answer for it." Behind him, the FBI loaded Crowell and the Pelican case into their armored truck. Agent Mulligan turned back to Tony, We'll be in touch. By the time Tony climbed into the Vigilante, word of Crowell's capture had gone viral. Half-baked rumors raced through text chains that the commissioner had confessed that the mayor was next, that Liberty City was in chaos. Byte tapped the dashboard's aftermarket console to check the feeds. Mainstreams erupting, every channel splintering into live panels, ours, theirs, pundits screaming into isolated cameras. Lucho leaned forward from the back seat. Now's when they fight back. He flicked his eyes toward the frozen faces in passing cars, taxis, clapped-out Hondas, armored vans painted with federal logos. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. They roared off the strip and threaded past the container yards of Portland Harbor, heading south toward the City Hall Plaza on Broker Island. The midday sun had burned away most of the fog, leaving only smudged columns of smoke trailing from distant protests. Banners snapped in the breeze. Clean house, power to the people, Tony is our voice. At the foot of the grand, marble steps, a makeshift stage had been erected. Microphones glowed on stands rigged by Byte's contacts at an independent livestream startup. Crowds filled the square. Street vendors hawked Liberty flags, children perched on their parents' shoulders waving torn flyers of Crowell's campaign poster. The air thrummed with a mixture of hope and tension. Tony stepped into the sunlight, boots clicking against the sidewalk, briefcase in hand. He surveyed the crowd, faces lined with hard-won suspicion, eyes bright with the prospect of real justice. He unlatched the Pelican case and raised a drive toward the sky. Liberty City! His voice boomed through the speakers and across every live feed. Today the walls of corruption cracked open. We took down a man who thought his uniform put him above the law. But this is just the beginning. A roar lifted from the plaza, and Tony continued, laying out the evidence. Video of Crowell's pay-to-play deals, audio of hit contracts negotiated in his own office, bank records showing dispersal of dirty money into campaign funds. Each clip cued on the giant screens behind him. Every revelation, punctuated by gasps or cheers. Even the hardened journalists at the press pen fell silent, mouths agape. Then the ground shook beneath them. Distant at first, a bass drum heartbeat that didn't belong to the crowd's chant. Heads turned skyward as two black helicopters dipped low over the harbor, armed with thermal scanners and spotlight arrays. They weren't here to film. They were here to intimidate. From the rooftops along Toronto Street, masked figures in tactical gear sprayed the plaza with rifle fire. Panic shredded the air. Screams, bodies diving behind bollards, shattered glass tinkling on stone tiles. Tony dove to one knee, yanking Lucho and Byte behind a vendor's cart. Rico returned fire from the stage's flank, picking off shooters one by one as civilians scattered. Tony unshouldered his shotgun, braced on the stage lip, and fired two precise blasts at a rooftop operator before bodyguards from the Independent media startup stormed forward, steel-toed and unflinching. The helicopters banked off, retreating beyond the harbor's edge. The plaza lay strewn with overturned carts and bleeding protesters. But the message had been delivered. When the smoke cleared, Tony stood in the scattered debris, water bottle in hand. He helped an injured teenager to his feet, patted a vendor's shoulder as she gathered her fallen flags. Overhead, the giant screens flickered back to the live stream, capturing him breathing hard, heart pounding like a prisoner's gate. "Don't be afraid," he called out. "They'll try to silence us. They'll send guns, they'll send lies, but they will not succeed." A cheer rose, ragged but unbroken. Snipers had aimed for fear. Instead, they stoked defiance. Back in the vigilante, bloodied hands on the corner wheel, Tony let out a slow breath. Beside him, Bite wiped sweat from his temple, face pale. Rico rubbed a fresh bruise on his arm. Lucho checked his empty magazine. They looked to Tony, waiting for the next word. He met their eyes and offered a tired grin. They wanted a war. We gave it to them. Now we take it inside. He fisted the steering wheel. Time to bring this fight to City Hall and then to the people who thought they could bury the truth forever. Through the vigilante's windshield, Liberty City sprawled ahead, its towers wreathed in protest banners, sirens still echoing from the plaza, neon billboards flashing the words, "Justice. Now." The final showdown was approaching fast. Every street, every block, every citizen was poised on the knife's edge between submission and revolution. Tony pushed his foot down, tires squealing onto Newark Avenue. In the distance, the skyline burned with possibility, and the promise that no gunshot would ever again enough to bury a city's cry for justice. The battle for Liberty City was far from over. The vigilantes' tires spat gravel as they turned off Newark Avenue onto Washington Boulevard. The broad facade of City Hall, looming like a whitewashed fortress against the bruised dawn sky. Riot barriers ringed the plaza. Armored vans blocked. The steps and riot police formed a wedge behind black shields. But the square thrummed with restless energy. Civilians streamed in from every borough, hungry for the moment when power would finally meet the people. Tony cut the engine in the alley beside the municipal service entrance. Bite peered at a tablet, mapping out the choke points. A service elevator shaft off the basement garage, a disused tunnel under the council chambers, and the security hub on the mezzanine. Rico checked his rifle and Lucho looped extra magazines into his vest. No uniforms, no badges, just the ghost crew that had already upended two of the city's most impenetrable strongholds. They slipped through a side door marked Maintenance. Only, the lock clicking open under Bite's deft override. The corridor smelled of damp concrete and old wiring. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, the weak hum echoing. Tony led them down the narrow hallway toward the freight elevators. At each junction, Bite paused the live CCTV feeds, freezing frames on empty hallways so no guard would notice their passage. When the elevator doors whooshed open on the third basement level, a lone custodian paused mid-sweep, broom in hand. Rico dropped a silenced pistol at his feet. The man crumpled without so much as a gasp. They bundled him into an alcove and moved on. A single unlocked hatch led into the cavernous parking garage, where 5 vans lay in wait, hijacked vehicles. From the mayor's own motor pool. Bite hacked their ignition systems. Lucho hot-wired one for Tony. Up they went, past rows of city-owned sedans, to the ground floor lobby. Doormen in pressed suits gawked as Rico and Lucho fanned out, shouldering riot shields they'd scavenged from the jeers outside. Tony paused in the atrium, where a massive marble fountain had been drained, its basin now a stage for the city's rage. He tapped his comlink. "Go live." On screens behind the information desk, Bite slid in a looping feed of vacant corridors, while hidden cameras recorded the real rush. Windows along the staircase revealed the mass of bodies outside. Protesters waving banners reading "Justice now, power to the people." Tonys within our streets. Cell phone footage streamed to social channels in real time. They breached the security office opposite the grand stair. 2 guards went down under quick strikes. Bite took the console. Alarms blared, but on every public monitor in City Hall. Bite overlaid the feed with Tony's face and the words, "This is legitimate citizen action." Visitors crowded in the vestibule, hesitant at first, then emboldened as the video walls cut off official CCTV and switched to Byte's live stream. Up the stairs they marched, shields raised to push back any uniformed resistance. On the mezzanine, they found the lockbox holding the master security keys. Rico disposed of the armored guard in one swift move. Lucho swiped the keys. Tony strode past the city clerk's offices toward the council chamber doors. A heavy plaque proclaimed, "People's Business." Irony dripped like blood from the lettering. Inside, council members huddled behind the long dais. Mayor, treasurer, city solicitor, faces as pale as marble. Flashbang smoke grenades erupted behind the chairs, sending attorneys and advisors scrambling. Tony paused center aisle. "This meeting is adjourned indefinitely," he announced. The chamber erupted in pandemonium. Chairs overturned, gavel clattered to the floor, microphones squealed. He advanced to the mayor's podium, rifling through folders stacked in disarray. One thick binder bore the seal of the city treasury, detailed. Ledgers of bribes, slush fund accounts, property flips rigged to funnel money into private hands. Tony flipped to a marked page and held it high. "Here's the money trail, from every real estate collapse in Shoreside Vale to every school shutdown in Staunton Island." He let the silence settle, weighty as a verdict. Outside, the crowd surged into the plaza, emboldened by the broadcast looping on every screen. They pressed against the windows, fists raised, chanting Tony's name. Security forces, cut off from orders, lowered their shields one by one. A few officers stepped forward to open the chamber doors, faces forced into relief. Tony stepped down from the dais and strode toward the mayor's bench. The mayor stood, shaking, clutching a pen like it could save him. "Mr. DeSantis, this is an illegal occupation," he stammered. "Maybe," Tony replied, sliding the mayor's gag pen out of his pocket, an incriminating stylus containing recorded confessions of pay-to-play deals. "But sometimes illegal is the only path to justice." He tapped the pen tip, activating the playback. The mayor's own voice spilled through the chamber speakers. Admissions of murder contracts, watering down of fines, secret approvals for contaminated water in the Bronx. Council members paled, realizing they'd become co-defendants in the city's biggest scandal. One by one, you could see them calculating their next move. Fight back and risk indictment, or surrender and buy a plea deal. They sank into chairs, defeated. Tony pulled zip ties from his boot, securing the mayor and his inner circle. He handed the treasury ledger to a stunned city clerk, nodding toward the exit. "You'll compile the public records. Everything goes online within the hour." From the back of the chamber, Lucho opened a side door to the press gallery. Dozens of journalists flooded in, cameras streaming every angle. Tony raised a hand. "Today," he said, "the people of Liberty City take back the narrative. No more backroom deals. No more hidden agendas. You call your own council. You demand your own budgets. You decide how this city lives or dies." The chamber, once a theater of scripted corruption, became a town hall in an instant. Citizens pressed forward with questions about housing, about policing, about schools. Tony let the mayor's assistant handle the mic as the room buzzed with genuine discourse. He slipped out quietly, leaving Rico and Lucho to oversee the transition. In the alley behind City Hall, Byte closed his laptop with a satisfied grin. The public stream had cracked the system open. Local leaders from every borough were organizing intersection block meetings, small groups planning community budgets, and even union reps discussing oversight boards. Tony lit a cigarette and looked up at the battered facade. The banners fluttering in the plaza now read "Truth above all" and "Citizen power." He crushed the butt under his heel. "They'll try to rally their loyalists," he said. "But this building belongs to the people now. We just handed them the keys." Rico clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You think it sticks?" He exhaled blue smoke into the morning air. "It has to. We've blown the roof off the lies. Now it's up to them to keep the light shining." They melted into the waking city, leaving behind a transformed skyline and the first true echo of self-governance in Liberty City. The fight was far from over. The next battles would be fought in courthouses and classrooms. But for the first time, it felt like the people had won. And that victory, fragile as it was, promised the start of something real. The plaza behind City Hall felt like sunrise itself had been invited to the party. Streets awash in a riot of banners, impromptu stalls handing out free coffee, and clusters of neighbors swapping stories about night watch patrols and community gardens. Tony paused at the edge of the crowd, breathing it in, dust swirling in shafts of light, the roar of 1,000 voices pledging to keep the momentum alive. Street musicians had found instruments in dumpsters, cobbling together a soundtrack of resilience that echoed off marble pillars. Children chased each other around planters painted in bright colors, their laughter for once louder than passing sirens. He slipped away with Bite and Carlo, threading through the crowd toward the courthouse on Broker Island. The steps there were still streaked with chalked messages: "Clear name, free Tony." Reminders that even the law could be bent by power. Inside, they found a small chamber where the new acting district attorney, a former public defender saved from obscurity by Tony's broadcast, stood waiting. Papers lay spread across her desk. The 2-year conviction record, the DA file stamped "Exonerate," and the brittle manila folder from the suitcase, each page marked in red pen, evidence that shuttered Tony's old case. Under flickering, fluorescent light, she slid a pen across the vacatur order. When it landed with a definitive snap, Tony felt the weight in his chest shift. Buried years of injustice finally exhumed. Outside the courthouse doors, reporters lunged forward with mics and flashbulbs. Tony lifted his hands, palms open, in a gesture that felt more honest than any lawyer's spin. "They sent me to Alderney for a crime I didn't commit," he said, voice steady. "Today I'm free, not because they forgave me, but because we forced their hand. Justice isn't given, it's made." The crowd surged around him, cell phones raised in triumph. Carlo cracked a rare smile, pumping a fist in the air. Bite's eyes glistened behind the glare of camera lights. They returned to South Shore's textile mill safehouse, where Lucho waited with steaming mugs of sweet black coffee. Plans spread out on tables once again, only this time the ink mapped out community councils, rotating leadership seats, and a citizen-run oversight committee set to convene under the old Schottler building's arches. Rico passed around a crate of donated radios for neighborhood watch groups. Bite plugged into a portable generator to keep the mesh network online. The revolution had moved from raids and broadcasts to town hall meetings and policy proposals, and everyone felt the thrill of building something real. Later, Tony found himself in Little Italy, following the scent of fresh-baked focaccia to a repurposed bakery where neighbors congregated over loaf board tables. He sat beside Mrs. Marino, whose storefront he'd once used to stash false IDs, and watched toddlers fingering donated school supplies. In that moment, the fight he'd waged no longer felt like a crusade, but a promise fulfilled. These faces, these lives were the reason he kept pushing through ambushes and betrayals. A gust of evening air brought carnival music from Staunton Island, and Tony allowed himself a slow nod, each burrow humming with its own revitalized heartbeat. Yet even as the city celebrated, a tremor of unease ran through Carlo's encrypted channel. Reports from Bohan hinted at a new criminal figure assembling ex-mercenaries under the cover of broken warehouses. Lucho, checking his burner phone, frowned at grainy photos of a man in a weathered leather jacket, someone who'd been spotted near the old Fort Staunton ruins. A ghost from Tony's past or the city's next challenge? No one knew, and that uncertainty was enough to sharpen focus. They'd won battles, but the war for Liberty City's soul would be fought block by block, vote by vote, and blade by blade if necessary. Under a tremulous sky, Tony returned to the docks where the original suitcase had arrived. The warehouse doors were padlocked once more, but he'd left his mark. The faded stencil of a phoenix rising from service crates. He ran a gloved hand across weathered wood and remembered the first time he'd held that battered case, heart pounding with fear and purpose. Now it stood as a relic of survival and the catalyst for change. He whispered a quiet vow to the empty pier. I'll keep digging up what they tried to bury. Climbing onto his motorcycle, Tony fired up the engine and felt the familiar rumble. Beneath him, the headlights cut through mist rolling off the Hudson, illuminating tracks that snaked toward every corner of the city. Algonquin's gleaming towers, brokers' council chambers, Dukes' forgotten corners. He thought of the people camped out on sidewalks, voting in neighborhood assemblies, policing their own blocks with radios and handshakes. This was their moment, fragile as spun glass, and he carried its fragility like a sacred trust. As he roared, away the silhouette of City Hall faded behind him, replaced by the flickering neon of a new day. Somewhere ahead, beyond the bridges and borough lines, a fresh reckoning waited, one that would test whether Liberty City could truly govern itself. But Tony DeSantis felt ready. With each twist of the throttle, he left behind the shadows of the past and sped toward a horizon defined not by corruption, but by the will of its people. And in that speeding blur of light and rain, he understood the greatest victory would be not his own freedom, but the city's. Fog clung to the jagged walls of the old Fort Staunton ruins like a living thing, dampening every footstep and muffling every breath. Tony DeSantis paused at the crest of a collapsed rampart, the weight of uncertainty pressing on his shoulders as heavily as his leather jacket. Below, the broken courtyard opened into shadows that had swallowed more secrets than the city could ever confess. A single flicker of movement caught his eye, too precise to be a rat, drawing him deeper into the skeleton of stone and rusted beams. Bite, crouched beside an overturned ammunition crate, tapped his earpiece. Thermals picked up movement 30 meters southeast, multiple heat signatures moving in formation. His voice crackled over the comlink. Looks like Mercs. Winter camo, SAS-style gear. I'm guessing they're clearing tunnels toward the central keep. Lucho checked his magazine count, every click echoing in the near-empty hall. Names? He asked. Who sends ex-soldiers into a ghost fort? No ID on the comms net. But I traced their sponsor back to shell companies owned by someone, calling himself Westmark Investments, front for a private military contractor. Bite exhaled. Might be tied to the same syndicate cells we thought we dismantled. Tony's jaw tightened. In the past week, the city had rallied behind him. Councils formed, courts reopened, public trust blossoming like defiant graffiti over old barricades. And now this, a new wave of professional killers moving into the city's oldest stronghold, planning something big. Whatever they had in mind, It threatened to tear apart months of fragile progress. He flicked on a pocket torch. Its beam revealed splintered wooden doors hanging from rusted hinges and beyond, a network of tunnels that had once linked Staunton's guard posts. The path ahead smelled of mildew, machine oil, and long-dormant dread. "We move," Tony murmured. "One team goes left to flank. Bite, can you hack the comms array in the central vault?" Bite's fingers danced over a rugged laptop. "Give me 2 minutes to replicate the signal breaker I used on Crowell's chopper network. I'll blind their handhelds for about 90 seconds. Rico spread out his brothers from the Haitian crew, 6 of them tailing mud-caked crates of medical supplies and extra magazines. "We hit fast, hit hard, no mercy," he warned, voice low. They nodded, faces painted in streaks of dust and determination. They split. Lucho led one column through a side breach under a collapsed tower. Tony and Rico took the long corridor toward the fortress's northern vault, where Bite said the enemy's comms node was hidden behind an old armory door. Every footstep set loose tiny showers of gravel, every half-whispered command a ripple through the darkness. The passageway opened onto a vaulted chamber, columns carved with peeling reliefs of saints and soldiers. In the center, a makeshift communications rack glowed with LED lights and antenna arrays jury-rigged to a satellite uplink. 4 mercenaries in winter camouflage crouched around it, loading mags and calibrating scopes. Tony pressed a gloved finger to his lips, then signaled Rico. With military precision, they moved in. Rico neutralized the nearest soldier with a precise elbow strike. Tony swept a leg out behind the second, sending him sprawling into the rack. A rifle discharged, bullet ricocheting off stone, as Bite's timed override sent a pulse through the array. Lights blinked out, screens flickered, and the mercs cursed into silent radios. Chaos exploded. Lucho's team burst in from the flank, grenades thudding onto concrete before hissing, smoke grenades to cover the advance. Rico swept the third gunman's feet from under him, and Tony seized the rack's wiring, yanking cables until the whole apparatus died with a last buzzing shriek. Breathing hard, Tony retrieved a data module from the wreckage. "Their intel," he said, sliding it into a secure pouch. "Let's see where Westmark's hiding the trigger." Bite's voice crackled in Tony's ear. "I'm in. They're syncing remote detonators to a secondary network. Something placed under City Hall's sub-foundations. They plan to collapse the new public chambers at first light. I can sever their link, but only after we take out the command node in the main keep." The word keep was enough. They regrouped by the crumbling fountain at the fortress's heart, where a statue of a forgotten general stared down their gathered force, flanked by merc tents adorned in black flags. The keep's iron door loomed like a gauntlet. Tony surveyed the assembled crew, Bite's gaunt face lit by torchlight, Lucho's steady posture, Rico's silent nod, the Haitian fighters ready with MP5s and 2 Russian muscle in dark leathers, scars crossing their cheeks like whispered threats. It was a motley army forged in necessity, and they all looked to him. He planted a hand on the keep's door. The metal felt cold, lifeless, until he withdrew a pair of breaching charges lining the frame. "Once this explodes, we have 60 seconds before the mercs reorient on us. Move like hell or we'll be trapped." The explosion shattered the night. A thunderclap that shook disintegrating turrets and sent fragments of masonry spraying into the sky. Tony led the charge through the breach, shotgun at the ready. Inside, the main hall sloped downward into a control room lit by flickering monitors. At the center stood a man in black tactical gear, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a skull-patterned balaclava. He turned slowly, hands raised in mock surrender. The skull mask reflected Tony's torchlight, creating a grin of death. "I'm glad you came, DeSantis," the man said, voice modulated but unmistakably warm with contempt. "I was beginning to think you'd hide behind your newfound democracy like every other politician's puppet." Tony leveled the shotgun. "Who are you?" The merc shifted weight. "Call me Quinn. My employers say I'm the answer to Liberty City's next chapter." He gestured to a console looping maps of City Hall's basements. "I run this node for 2 more minutes and I take down every chamber you just handed back to the people." He tapped a sequence on the console. Sirens began to echo through the keep's corridors. An alarm, and not just physical security. Byte's override probably just ended. Tony signaled Rico. "Take the left exit. Lucho right. I'll deal with Quinn." They scattered into the maze of corridors as bullets pinged off steel beams. Tony barreled toward Quinn's station, firing off a slug that ripped through the console before Quinn could duck. Sparks flew, screens exploded, and the final link went dark. The tremor beneath their feet stilled. But Quinn was already beside him, fists cracking into Tony's ribs, sending him reeling backward into a blood-spattered wall. The world spun as Quinn's boot connected with Tony's chest. Pain flared. Tony's vision dimmed at the edges. Somewhere behind him, Lucho and Rico converged on Quinn's flank, pressure spraying rifle fire. Quinn barked a curse, then bolted, down a side passage before disappearing into darkness. Tony coughed, hauling himself upright as Byte's voice re-entered the channel. "Node's down. No more detonator link. You've got a clear shot at city grids. Nothing's coming from here." He latched onto a column for support, body aching from the blow. The keep's alarm still blared, echoing off ancient stone. Outside, rain had started again, each drop a cold reminder that dawn was near. Rico helped Tony toward a service hatch. "You shot good," but Quinn slipped away. Tony touched his side, where a dark stain bloomed on his shirt. "He's baited me into this," Tony panted. "Wanted me focused on City Hall while his cell closes in on the new neighborhood councils." Byte cut in. "I traced Quinn's exit. He's heading east toward the fort's underground dock where a submersible is tied up. He plans to slip out by river, regroup, and come back stronger." Tony let out a breath that felt like defeat. "Then we cut him off. I learned the hard way you can't let ghosts roam free." He forced himself upright. "Load me up. We take the van down to the old ferry slip. I'm finishing this tonight." As they carried Tony through the labyrinth of broken corridors, the first gray light of dawn filtered down from shattered windows. Liberty City's streets would awaken soon, unaware that its guardian was bleeding out in a forgotten fortress. Below, through the tunnel's mouth, Quinn's silhouette merged with the looming sub, an escape that could spark a second assault at any moment. Tony's grip tightened around Lucho's shoulder. "Get me there," he rasped, "before he vanishes for good." And so, limping toward the final breach of Fort Staunton's underbelly, Tony braced for one last confrontation. The penultimate hour had nearly claimed him, his allies wounded, the new threat still at large. But as the city slumbered beyond the breakwater, he carried with him the fragile hope that even bleeding, Liberty City's sentinel could stand between its people and the returning darkness. The final reckoning was moments away. Rain dripped from Tony's jacket as he stumbled out of the Fort Staunton service tunnel onto the slick planks of the old ferry slip. The fog had lifted enough for dawn's pale light to trace the hulking outline of a rusted sub moored against cracked pilings, a silent predator waiting to vanish beneath the Hudson's surface. Tony leaned on Lucho's shoulder, boots sinking into oily water that sloshed around their ankles. His side throbbed where Quinn's fist had folded him against the stone, but there was no time to bleed out. Bite's voice crackled through the comm unit. "Power's up on the slip gates, remote override enabled. You've got 5 minutes before security drones sweep this sector." The mesh network's signal glowed red on Bite's handheld, but it held. "Make it count." Rico shoved Tony upright. "We've got your back," he said, voice tight. The Haitian crew fanned out along the dock's edge. MP5s trained on the sub's hatch. 2 Russians crouched beside Lucho, ready to breach. Tony swallowed, hand shaking around his shotgun grip, then keyed the breather valve on his mask open. "Quinn ends here." A hatch hissed above the sub's conning tower. Quinn's silhouette framed the porthole, skull-patterned mask glowing in the half-light. He leveled a suppressed pistol toward them. "Come to die, DeSantis?" His voice was both mockery and promise. Tony aimed low, fired. The slug tore into the metal beneath Quinn's elbow, mangling the hinge and sending the hatch snarling inward. Splinters rained down as Quinn crouched lower, trading fire. 2 Haitians returned fire from the pier, forcing him to retreat behind the hatch's opening slab. Hidden behind the sub's conning tower, Quinn's movement was measured. He kicked, a panel open, wheeling out a break-action shotgun. Lucho sprinted, swinging his buttstock into Quinn's side as Rico dove for flanking cover. The shotgun roared. The blast caught Rico's shield plate but left him standing. Tony lunged, baton smashing Quinn's wrist and bending the weapon's barrel. Quinn snarled, fists swinging. They traded brutal close-quarters blows, Quinn's experience as a contractor showing in every calculated strike, Tony's hunger for justice fueling each counter. Bite moved to the sub's hull junction, hot-wired the external override Bite had installed moments earlier. "Hatch override coming." "Online, stand by," the latch clicked. Through the hiss of hydraulics, the sub's deck hatch began to unlatch. With a roar, Tony body-checked Quinn backward into the slanted deck. Sparks flew and Quinn's mask scraped against the hatch's rim. Tony slammed his forearm across the skull motif, cracking Quinn's jaw against cold steel. Quinn staggered, blood trickling from a split lip. Tony kicked out, sending him sprawling feet first down the ladder into the hatch's dark belly. He leapt after him, shotgun poised only to be met by the sub's narrow confinement. Inside the sub's control room was a tangle of valves and blinking consoles. Quinn tried to scramble past a panel of levers marked Ballast Emergency Flood. Tony blocked his path, shotgun aimed at Quinn's sternum. "One more move and you're swimming with the fishes." Quinn spat blood onto the console. "You think you've won? You've only just begun a war you can't finish." He lunged, slamming Tony's shoulder into the bulkhead, trading places. Sparks erupted from a damaged conduit overhead. The room, flooded with alarm klaxons. Rico's voice cut in. "Tony, hatch override's timed out, get out." The sub's internal flood alarms began pumping air from the hull, converting the space into a pressurized trap. Water seeped in through rattled seals. Tony scooped Quinn in a headlock and dragged him toward the hatch, Bite's override still hacking the wiring. Every step sank them deeper into standing water that rose above Tony's knees. Quinn wriggled, free, punching Tony square in the jaw, sending him face first into the rising tide. Dazed, Tony felt the world tilt. He kicked out the hatch's release latch with his boot just as the hatch slid open. Rico and Lucho seized Quinn's arms and dragged him from the sub's belly, dropping him onto the deck. Bite shattered the final wire link. With a rumble, the wire sub's hatch clanged shut behind them. Tony backed away, shotgun raised as the vessel's ballast pumps groaned and the hull began to tilt, water sluicing through the damaged seal. Within seconds, the sub listed and tipped, plunging beneath the surface with a thunderous wave that drenched the entire slip. They stood on the soaking planks as the tide rushed over rails, carrying away the sub's silhouette into the murky depths. Quinn lay cuffed against a piling, breathing shallow but alive, mask battered beyond recognition. Bite clicked off his laptop. The override mesh blinked out, reverting slip gates to manual. Within minutes, federal cruisers and unmarked vans would converge. Tony exhaled, pain blossoming in his side. Rico knelt beside him, bandaging the wound with a field tourniquet. Lucho secured Quinn to the gurney Rico had pulled from Bite's stash. "He's not walking anywhere," Lucho muttered. Bite pulled open the Pelican case and retrieved the final data module, the one from the comms node in the keep, the blueprints for City Hall's chambers, and encrypted files exposing every front, company tied to Westmark Investments. "This is everything," he said. "Syndicate cells, PMCs, offshore accounts, clean sweep." He plugged the drive into his laptop and activated the beacon. 10 seconds later, the files began uploading across every open channel in Liberty City, breaking news, protest feeds, community radio, even the mayor's own campaign ticker. A distant siren chorus rose and fell. Spotlights swept the slip. The gates creaked open as SWAT teams swept in, weapons leveled at the group on the docks. Tony raised his hands, shotgun slung at his back. An FBI agent in tactical gear elbowed Quinn aside and approached him. "DeSantis?" Tony nodded, every breath a rasp. "I think you've got him." He eased to his feet, leaning against the piling for support as the agent cuffed Quinn more securely. "Congrats," the agent said quietly. "We'll take it from here." He glanced at the screens on Bite's laptop, now streaming data across social platforms. "You're a hero." Pain shot through Tony's ribs and he closed his eyes. Just a guy who couldn't let his city drown in silence. Behind him, cranes dipped in the harbor. Windows in distant towers flickered with the files from his upload, evidence that would dismantle every shadow network, shutter every shell corporation, and break the back of corruption for good. Rico and Lucho fell in around him. Bite slipped his laptop into the Pelican case. They moved as one toward the waiting SUVs, Quinn's metal-clad form secured in the back of an unmarked van. The early morning sky brightened to a steel blue, the skyline etched against hope. On the quay's edge, Tony paused, hand trailing along the rusted rail. He thought of every alleyway meeting, every backroom deal exposed, every council that now opened its doors to the people. Liberty City thrummed with a future still unwritten. He limped forward, body bruised but spirit unbowed, and climbed into the front seat of the Vigilante. Bite settled beside him as Rico and Lucho took the rear. The engine roared to life, echoing over the water. Tony pressed his hand to the window, watching the sun claw its way through the buildings. "Where to now?" Bite asked, voice gentle. Tony exhaled. "Home," he said. "There's a town hall meeting in Little Italy at noon, and I'm overdue for a new suit." He let a crooked smile break through the tension. "And tomorrow, the first day of the rest of this city's life." As they peeled away from the slip and threaded onto Newark Avenue, Liberty City stretched before them, vetting its leaders, rising toward accountability, and waking to the promise of self-governance. In Tony's rearview mirror, the docks receded, the rippling water smoothing itself into calm. He leaned back, eyes forward, feeling every mile carry him farther from a past of wrongful convictions and betrayal, and closer to a future where liberty, city belonged to its people at last. Above him the skyline burned bright with every flicker of screen and banner proclaiming, "Justice awakened." And in that dawn's glow, Tony DeSantis knew the greatest victory was not in the battles won, but in the city's enduring heartbeat, steady, relentless, free. Did you know we also have stories based on Vice City? Check out our channel to discover them. Now get out of here before I decide your wallet is worth more than our friendship.